Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, friends of all. How are you guys doing tonight? It's a Wednesday, and I never know. I never know which of these evenings works out best for everyone. So I'm hoping that it looks like there's quite a few of you here tonight, and I really appreciate you coming out on a lonely Wednesday. I guess there's not a ton of other things going on in the world right now, but I'm deeply honored. Welcome to another exciting virtual tour with Pretty Gritty Tours. I'm your host, Chris Staudinger. It's good to see you all, and welcome back. Welcome back. Tonight we are doing a virtual tour of Olympia, and I'm very excited for this one because I feel like Olympia gets a bad rap. I know all the reasons that people say whatever they do about Olympia, but I think there's a lot more. Whatever people dislike in their mind about Olympia pushes a lot of the good things out of their view. And they don't realize that it's a really incredible city and there's a lot actually going on down there. So I'm hoping that we can at least get you guys interested tonight. It is worth saying too, this is just a cursory glance at historic Olympia. We have designs on doing quite a few things as far as virtual tours with Olympia coming up here, and we're going to be doing a Olympia beer tour, just dedicated Olympia beer tour like our previous beer tour. We have an Olympia ghost tour coming up as well, so there's a lot of Olympia and surrounding area coming up, but this is just to introduce you guys at the party, so you can be like, hey, I know Olympia, I met you last time, which is an excellent time to thank our sponsor this evening, Olympia Beer. It really is in the water. All right, let's just check in with you guys. How are you all doing? It's good to see you all. Got the usual suspects out here. Glad to see some top fans commenting in the screen zone here. I don't know what I'm saying. You guys ready to go experience Olympia? Let's do it. Ooh, we've got some people in Olympia right now, so that's exciting. I hope that we can share the love of your hometown with you. Well, let's do it, my friends. So we're looking at historic Olympia tonight, like I said, and there's so much ground to cover. I've tried my best to distill it down in just a potent shot of the city because we're really focused on the historic district. So when you're looking at Olympia, we'll fly out on the Puget Sound here. It's that section right down here, and it covers quite a bit of space. It's very close to Tumwater, right down here in the south section here. But when we're talking about historic Olympia, we're coming down sort of by Percival Landing, McMiniman Spar, right in this sort of block right down here. And we are going to focus the beginning of our journey on the old Capitol building and Sylvester Park, which are right in the heart of the downtown Olympia zone. When most people think of Olympia, I don't think it's a stretch to say that they think of like Capitol Lake and Capitol Campus, which is this section here that has all of like the Washington State Supreme Court, the Temple of Justice, the legislative building. All of those are located in a single campus, and that's an interesting story on how that happened. So I'm going to tell you about it right now. But really, I'm going to focus very little tonight on the Capitol campus. There are dedicated tours to do that whole experience in and of itself. My job tonight is to shine the flashlight of knowledge on some of the areas that people don't really associate with Olympia, but really, really should. Okay, let's dive on in. Quick shout out tonight to our sponsors. The Olympia Historic Society and Bigelow House Museum and Experience Olympia and Beyond both have been very kind to us in the past, inviting us down. There were designs for Pretty Gritty Tours to be doing a whole series of walking tours in the Olympia area this year. Of course, things have changed a little bit. So this is getting us back down there, and these partners have been very big in that. And in fact, the Bigelow House is not just a historic society, but they also have, as you may have guessed, the Bigelow House Museum. It is one of the oldest structures in the state of Washington, and the Bigelow family, as is shown here in the black and white photo, settled in the area really early on, like in the 1850s. And that house was family owned by the Bigelows until, I believe, 2005. And then it got turned over to Olympia, and now they operate their museum out of it. So it's really an incredible spot. And you can see it has changed not much at all. They've done some modern amenities and changes to it, but it is pretty much the same spot. Olympia, on the other hand, has changed dramatically. Geez, more beer, please. Has changed drastically from it was first founded. And I think not just in the way that it is operated, but in the way that the city is actually lined up. And one of the biggest changes has been to Bud Inlet, which, if you look on our map out here, is this beauty right here. And I think that Tacoma, my city, and Olympia are pretty friendly. We don't have the same rivalry that like Tacoma and Seattle have. But all of these cities were top contenders to be like the it city. Everyone wanted to be the Seattle. And Olympia was the forerunner for it for a while there. They ended up the capital. You know how the story ends. How we get there is a little more of a mystery. But the thing that was hanging them up so much was the Bud Inlet, because when it was originally their main port, they built a dock on it. But during low tide, it was dry. Like you could walk up to the dock. You couldn't get ships up to it, and you could only access it essentially at high tide. And it took them a long time to figure out that issue. So it did lose them some points in becoming the main it city out there. But they've always had a tremendous amount of infrastructure. The first school in the Washington territory, the first library, the first post office, all of the things that you think of as like establishing the American way, law and order, started in Olympia first. We do have to give them credit for that. And the Customs House first originated in the Washington territory out there in Olympia. And you can pretty much follow the history of Olympia by following the money. When the area was originally settled, they managed to move goods in and out on the water because there was no other way to really maneuver through the territory of Washington. And as soon as the U.S. government was like, oh boy, they're moving a lot of stuff off the water into the country, we better do something about that. Boom, the Customs House showed right up, and that is how we got a sense of law and order in the area established for the first time. As it developed, we got to see a lot of really classy, bolsters to the economy showing up in the area, and it became the it spot to trade and to buy. And one of the big impetuses behind that was that the Fort Nisqually, established by the Hudson Bay Company, wasn't too far away originally. It was right in that area. And in fact, the first settlers to the area in the 1850s only survived their first winter in the area by being out there at the Fort Nisqually area. And then after they were all set up, they built their own shopping center right down on the waterfront, and they called it New Market, demonstrating that it was an alternative to the Hudson Bay Company, which I think is a pretty ice cold move to survive only through the grace and kindness of the Hudson Bay Company, and then be like, thank you so much for the support. By the way, we're your only contender in the area now. But you know what? I love it. Ambitious. Olympia also is tied forever to the Olympic range. And there's debate as to which was named based on which one. But you can see the Olympics just west of Olympia. And these are them right here. So you can see it's a pretty exquisite range. I think people always think of the Cascades and Mount Rainier when they're thinking about Washington State, but the Olympics are stunning and peppered with hot springs and our own rainforest. So they shouldn't be underestimated. If you guys are harshing on the Olympic range right now, please stop. So our guys who really set this up are pictured right here. Well, half of them. Edmund Sylvester is the main founder of Olympia as we know it today. He had a business partner, Levi Smith, and Levi Smith was arguably the more prominent individual. Back when they settled the area, they really carved out literally an area where they could start doing business out there. And people really liked Levi. They were like, boom, you should be on the Oregon legislative. And so he was on his way to the very first session once Oregon became a state. And unfortunately, he drowned from a canoe accident on the way. Not missing a beat, Sylvester was like, yikes. Well, I will carry on the legacy. And so he basically took over everything that Smith left behind and really started to establish the area of Olympia. Now, he wasn't alone there. The Nisqually Nation had been there for a very long time. And so they actually gave a lot of the names out there. In fact, they were mostly camped on the Deschutes River at that area. And they called the area Tumwater, meaning strong water, which is where we get the name Tumwater today. And the Cheatwooth, I think, was the other name for the area, for the Bud Inlet area, because Cheatwooth means bear. And at low tide, the area looks like the head of a bear. So through a sometimes tense relationship with the Nisqually, that area really blossomed. But it was doubly popular for two reasons. One, if you were trying to get anywhere in Washington, you would have to go through this spot because essentially it was the end of the Oregon Trail. There was a First Nations trail that essentially went from like the Portland area up to the Olympia area. And it was the only way that you could really navigate the dense old growth forest at that time. The other thing is the easiest way to get anywhere was on the Puget Sound itself. And to go as far south as you really could put you in the Olympia Nisqually area. And so this became the like heartland of both the Puget Sound and people coming up from Oregon. And it was a natural sell for a lot of people. Once they discovered coal in the area too, they're like, oh man, we could do whatever we want here. And then when the money was good, they're like, all right, let's do it. The name Olympia, I've been told a few different things. I think this quote down here from Isaac Eby back very early on is that at a dedication ceremony that Sylvester had for the city, his buddy here came down and gave this beautiful speech. You can see it in its full glory right here. The ending part of it is, Olympia's gods might view with grace, nor scorn so fair a dwelling place. And I really like to envision him in his full regalia out there as the only entertainment at the time. But he was the first one to associate the area with the gods of Olympus, and that the Olympic range bore a striking resemblance to them. And so Edmund Sylvester was like, Olympia is a catchy name. Maybe we should go with it. And thus it was cemented forever. The other thing that really set the area off, like I said, was the water connection. And this was the birth of the mosquito fleet. Which if you're into the Washington state history at all, you've heard mosquito fleet before. And it references the like hodgepodge mismatched collection of steam and sail ships and tugboats that took up residence in the area and were responsible for bringing in all these tall ships. Now, as you have all these giant, massive sail ships coming into the Puget Sound to do trade, they needed help navigating those waters, specifically the Bud Inlet, which wasn't even a waterway at low tide. And so when they would arrive into the Puget Sound, they would get swarmed by this fleet of people that were as annoying as mosquitoes. And they had the most colorful captains, certainly in the area, probably on the West Coast. And they would just try to underbid each other. They'd all be yelling at stuff. They'd be like, you don't want to go with Johnny. He's a real dick. You're going to come with me. I'll cut you a price. And he's like, no. I'll give you 20% off whatever he says. And they would just hassle each other, ram one another's boats, do all sorts of crazy stuff, trying to get people to pay them to tow them in and help them navigate. And this became like the everything. They not only brought ships in and out of the Puget Sound, but they also helped people go from one place to the other. Because as all the little settlements started to show up on the edges of the water out here, Tacoma, Steilacoom, Seattle, the easiest and often the only way to get from one to the other was on the water. And if you didn't want to just bundle up the family and take them in the canoe, you hired someone from the mosquito fleet to help you navigate the water. And these guys had crazy stories. Some of my favorites are that they would use animal companions to navigate. So in Olympia, there was a guy who always would put his dog on the dock, and then that's how he would get back. He'd wait for the dog to bark. So he could bring in his ship in the middle of the night, specifically in a heavy fog bank. He'd whistle, the dog would bark, and then he would just use it to navigate through the fog bank. Until one fateful day, a passenger was waiting on the dock, not knowing anything about this system. And the dog was barking so much that he's like, oh, I can't stand it. So he chased the dog off the dock, threw rocks at him until he went up in the woods, and the ship ran aground because the captain was like, oh, that's weird. I guess he's way up here. And just plowed right into a rock. No casualties, except I assume the captain had words with that dude, not only for causing his ship to run aground, but for throwing rocks at his dog. It's messed up. Here you go. An illustrative depiction. This is not of that. This is of a different wreck with a mosquito fleet. These guys were ruthless, so it wasn't uncommon for them to run into each other, but it was mostly congenial. This is not of the area, but this is of the mosquito fleet on the Puget Sound. So the biggest thing that I think Edmund Sylvester really contributed to the area was Sylvester Park. So when you're looking at Olympia and we come back down into the area here, excuse me, you can look, I've flown too far, down into the historic district here. Sylvester Park is the main section here, and it was the town square, essentially. Anytime that they were going to have a meeting, news was going to be posted on a bulletin board, anything like that, it would happen down here at Sylvester Park. And it was more or less just a hangout and a field where people would graze their livestock. As time went on, Sylvester donated a significant amount of land to the city of Olympia so that they could build up their infrastructure. But people mostly hung around Sylvester Park. And yes, why were they called the mosquito fleet? Because they buzzed around people like mosquitoes. They were super annoying. And as soon as a ship that looked like it had any value would show up, they would just get swarmed. They'd be all over that ship, and all the captains would be competing, jostling each other, trying to get that business. And I know there's been several books written about it. I think the most famous of the mosquito fleet books is, I think it's The Maritime History of Olympia and the South Sound, something like that. It's one of the Images of America books, which I'm sure you've probably seen. You'll see them around. They've got the like sepia tone photograph on the front, and they have them for a variety of topics. That's the one I'm most familiar with, and it's definitely a good one. I've read it a few times. This is Sylvester Park, kind of its heyday. And like I said, it became the town square where business happened. And this is just a great shot. This is of the White House during World War I, I think, where it was very common as sort of like a booster to let sheep graze on prominent lawns. The wool was being sheared and then turned into uniforms for officers that were in military of all shapes, NCO and what overseas, but they didn't want to pay to do any sort of lawn maintenance at the time because they had a ration and everything. So it was not uncommon to put livestock out on all the lawns. And so Sylvester Park was not exempt from that rule. So everyone's bringing their livestock down to graze on the lawn during World War I. And I couldn't find a picture of that specifically, but I did have this great one of sheep on the White House lawn back in early 1900s. I'm trying to remember which part of World War I it was in. The first building that we recognize down there is originally designed as a courthouse. This was built by the Thurston County as a courthouse, and then it was such a nice building that they turned it into the Capitol building for a long period of time there. The first Capitol building for the Washington Territory was actually in the same location that we have the national or the state campus today. And then the governor at the time was like, "Oh, this building's gorgeous. Why don't we use it?" And you can see it had a clock tower, and so they loved it. That was back in 1905, and it was a short-lived tenure because it was hit by a fire. It was way too small. And then in, I think, 1928, it was hit by an earthquake and then a fire, and it was just too much. The clock tower there was completely destroyed. And it was the same year that they finished the legislative building that we have today up on the state campus. So they just moved everything out of there. This is still a city-owned building. I forget which office is in there right now, but it's one of those government offices that I know so little about. And it's like the superintendent of tending to, someone in the comments will know. Google's right there for you guys. This is what it looks like today. It's still a beautiful building, even though it's missing quite a few towers from the 1949 earthquake. And of course, that sweet clock tower from 1928. But it's pretty great. And you can see the green creatures coming out of the wall there. This is just a fun footnote for you guys. These are genuine gargoyles. Most things that you think of when you think of a gargoyle are actually grotesques. This is just a nerd thing. The difference between a grotesque and a gargoyle is, to be a gargoyle, you have to be a functional rain spout. So there you go. It comes from the French word for throat. And it's a very specific design feature in architecture. Where is it a functional drain spout? It's a gargoyle. If it's not, if it's just a statue of something to protect the building, it's a grotesque. The more you know. The area, I have to talk about Governor Isaac Stevens. He was the first Washington Territory governor back before Washington got statehood. And this dude is just a piece of work. You've probably heard me talk about him in a lot of our other tours. And he was just disastrous across the board, no matter where you were. He was intensely brutal to the Nisqually and the Puyallup and all of the other First Nations in the area. I've told a lot of dark stories about his mishandling of that, including the Indian Wars. At one point, he declared the Indian Wars over, and then they were all attacked. All of the communities like Seattle, Tacoma were attacked like 3 days later. He had a period of time where he essentially, any homesteaders out in the area that he thought were suspicious, he's like, "You're aiding and abetting everyone out there, so you need to move into the fort." And if they refused, he arrested them. When those homesteaders were like, "What the hell, man, we're on your side," appealed that actually to the territory's Supreme Court, the judge was like, "You can't do that." And so demanded that they all be released. And Isaac Stevens responded by declaring martial law, sending them a militia to kick in the judge's door and drag him out under arrest. Crazy stuff. He was then in contempt, eventually got turned over. The only thing that happened was he had to pay a $50 fine for going through all this stuff. And it blows my mind, the stuff that he got away with. Anyhow, if we're talking about Olympia, we have to at least talk briefly about Territorial Governor Isaac Stevens. There he is. He eventually went back and served in the Civil War, where he caught a bullet while leading a charge. So that was in the 1860s that he eventually departs from this mortal coil. This is Sylvester Park today, looking northward at some prominent historic structures that we're going to get into here, but I kind of wanted to sink you into the area. So I'm going to take you back to the map really quick. So this is the area that we're going to really sort of talk about flying down here. And it's got a lot of good stuff to it. Also, quickly, we are going to talk about the McMiniman Spar Cafe. I get asked as a tour guide in Tacoma all the time if the Spar bar up here in Tacoma is the famous one, and it is not. The Spar up here in Tacoma is the oldest bar in Tacoma's Old Town, but the McMinimans brothers, who, if you're not from the area and familiar with them, are very famous in the Pacific Northwest for buying historic properties and then turning them into adult summer camps. They put breweries, distilleries, music venues, hotels, secret rooms, all sorts of stuff inside historic structures and then save them from being demolished. They're like local heroes. But the Spar Cafe down here in Olympia is an original 1920s like soda fountain, cigarette shop, brunch, luncheonette that has been purchased by the McMiniman brothers and turned into a swanky diner pool hall. And that's usually the one that people are talking about. So if someone's like, oh, is this the famous Spar? They're definitely talking about Olympia. I don't want you guys to get your hopes up, Tacoma. The Hotel Olympia is, if you're looking at the map here really quick, just kitty corner to the old Capitol building, which is right here. And so when you're looking at the old Capitol building, which is just across the street from Sylvester Park, right on the corner here is the Hotel Olympian. And this was the it spot. Like all of the major deals in Olympia in the early days were brokered here. It is very haunted based on everyone who's talked to me about it. And it did have, I can't confirm if they're still there, secret tunnels that moved from the Capitol building into the hotel. And so all of the major legislative moves, ambassadors, people coming and trying to talk anyone into doing something or something else, usually happened in the lobby, the dining room, or the dance hall of this particular building. But it wasn't always so grand. Olympia started out very much like this. And the thing that makes Olympia so great is that their waterway was dry at low tide, but the rest of the city frequently flooded because the entire thing is built on an artesian well. There's essentially just over, I think, 160 known artesian wells in the area. And they have launched the city to some of its highest fame, but they've also been responsible for some of its greatest sogginess, I guess I'll say. A lot of the original structures were like this gentleman right here with his confectionery sugar shop just downtown, and really established everything like the Union Pacific building here on 4th Avenue, which even today is the major, I guess, economic lifeblood of the area down there and where a lot of the cool stuff happens. So right down here, including just a shout out to King Solomon's Reef. If you haven't gone to King Solomon's Reef in Olympia, they have legit the best chicken and waffles I've had in Washington State. It's this funky building right here. And like so many things in Olympia, it looks where you're like, I don't know, man, if this is going to be a good choice. And you go in and you're blown away by the quality of it. And that is a pretty gritty tour's signature. We really like to focus on places where people are like, I don't know if I feel comfortable with this decision. And then they try it and they're like, why doesn't everybody know about this? That's why we operate out of Tacoma. And Olympia is just a beautiful example of that, where like I said early on, people always have a distrust of it when they're walking around down there, but it's really a phenomenal place and they do a lot of good stuff. So let's continue on down 4th Avenue here. One of the things that made 4th Avenue so great, it was the installment of these. These are wooden pipes to help divert the water. So as infrastructure started to get put into place down there, everything was in wooden pipes, and that was to help the city establish itself. Again, you can't really win with the entire thing because there's so much groundwater coming up from the artesian well, plus you're sort of on a tide flat in the area there, and you really have to do some civil engineering to find a successful place down there, because to prevent anything from just essentially falling into sogginess of the tide flats, you have to drive your pilings often like 60 feet down if you're going to build the foundation of a building, and you have to do that without flooding the building on the top. So it takes some doing. One of the more interesting parts of the historic district, I'm going to take you guys down here. So this is Water Street right here. Water Street gets its name because before all of the civil engineering was done by the Corps of Engineers, Water Street was the original water line for this area. And right over here where it says Olympia on this mural used to be the heart of Olympia's Chinatown. And Olympia is pretty unique, pretty much in the state of Washington, in that during the Great Chinese Expulsion that was going on in like the 1850s here, after a lot of places were built up, and then they kind of wanted to push out the Chinese. So the Tacoma method is something that gets referenced a lot, where Tacoma was like, nope, we're going to go push everyone out by gunpoint. If you're a Chinese national, you're gone. And then they burned Chinatown to the ground. And Olympia tried to follow suit, and they were like, okay, we're going to do the exact same to our Chinese population. And the sheriff at the time refused. He was like, absolutely not. We're not going to let this happen down here. And so the Chinese population got to stay in Olympia, and they were not exactly welcomed at the time, but it changed pretty quickly. And in fact, became a place for other Chinese nationals who got forced out of their different towns to sort of find a home to live. The greatest amount of people that showed up from China to settle in the Olympia area, mostly to work on the railroad or in the timber industry, were from the Lok region of China. And so they all adopted the name Lok, essentially. And so even today, a lot of people who find their family coming from the area and settling there still have the Lok name. And so, in fact, the first Chinese American governor in the country, Gary Lok, grew up in the Olympia area, was the governor of Washington State for quite a long period of time. He is from that long line of Loks in the area there. And they find that anchor due mostly from Sheriff William Billings, who was the sheriff who refused to let anyone leave or to let anyone destroy the Chinatown, and from the first sort of mover and shaker in the area, Sam Fun Lok. And Sam Fun Lok was a Chinese national who became very proficient at English. He was literate in both English and Chinese, and set up the first bank for Chinese nationals in the area, and really helped to establish Olympia's Chinatown as an economic center and a place where people could have legitimate businesses. So, well done. And yeah, the very same. Gary Lok, but with an E at the end. So Olympia's Chinatown was saved from disaster for so many times, but the thing that they didn't expect to happen was for it to be struck by a fire. So the reason that there's an Olympia mural down there today and no other historic structures is because all of Chinatown was accidentally burned down by a fire. And they managed to go quite a long period of time without being attacked through racial aggressions. So a lot of the Chinese community that was there at the time remained and continued to build their lives in the area, but so much anti-Chinese legislation was coming through at a federal level at the same time that no new families were allowed to come in. And so a lot of the Chinatowns just sort of dwindled away. And with Olympia, it became integrated into the greater society. When you're looking at this, though, and here's for all my history nerds right here, I'm going to see if I can put this one up for you guys in the comments below. This is a look at the Sanborn fire insurance maps. And what Olympia has done, I love, they've superimposed it on essentially the map of Olympia today. So if you're looking at the Sanborn maps, these guys went through all over, but particularly here in the Puget Sound area, and did essentially assessment maps where they would look at buildings, their risks for fires, and then would do the assessment on what you could essentially get with your insurance if there were a fire. And they are some of the most detailed and oldest maps from way back when. So if you're looking for good, rich historic information, Sanborn fire maps are really great for all of the cities in the Pacific Northwest. And Olympia is pretty unique in that, like I said, they've superimposed it over the map of Olympia as it is today. And I love this because you can click on these historic structures here and it tells you more information about them. This is an excellent point as well. So much of the Chinese population, not just in Olympia, but all throughout the Puget Sound, were men who came over here to work and then send money back home. And then because there weren't many women coming over, a lot of those populations just dwindled out on their own, as you would expect in that scenario. So this, I've shared the link for you guys on that so you can play around with it more because it's got some great stuff, but also is a really excellent resource if you want to look at just how the city has really evolved over time. One of the big ones you'll notice is that the water has changed dramatically, which brings us to the Artesian wells of Olympia. So one of the most prominent immigrants to come to Olympia and give it its greatest claim to fame was our gentleman here with the fantastic mustache, Leopold Schmidt. And Leopold Schmidt was just a mover and a shaker. He took his family all over. They were mostly in Montana, where he was looking into gold and mining. And he was like, we're going to take our riches from the earth and we're going to be famous and we are going to make it happen. But like any good German immigrant at the time, he was also super into beer. And when he got to Olympia and was surveying it for the possibility of being a good mining town, he found these artesian wells. And he was like, oh man, we'll change our plan right now. And so he did. He brought the whole family out to the Olympia area and they started making beer. And it was good. So this is where the slogan, "It's the water," comes from, because so much of beer really is the ingredients. If you're not familiar with an artesian well, this is essentially what it is here. Water is pressurized by being underground, and to find its level, if you drill deep enough down, it will actually come up to the surface, and it is this pure filtered groundwater. So on the left, you have an example of an artesian well where you have to actually draw the water out. The majority in Olympia are flowing artesian wells where the water will actually just come out on its own. Once you tap that hole, the water just flows out and you don't have to do anything with it. And the majority of wells in Olympia are of this variety. I think if I got here, yeah. So the Schmidt family sets up right out here, just on the Deschutes River, which if you're trying to figure out where the heck that is. So if you go up Capitol Lake and then this direction here, this is where you're at. So in fact, historic Schmidt House, this is the Leopold Schmidt House. It is a museum today full of a lot of the family's history and artifacts and heirlooms in there, but it is right on that river. So the Deschutes is where they set up, and you can see the old Olympia brewery right here and this path that came down from the Schmidt house to the brewery. And Leopold Schmidt walked it every single day. He would come down, work in the brewery, and then come back up to the house. And the whole family got involved with this to the point where all of the Schmidt sons were going down, and they actually just had quarters built inside the brewery. So they would sleep down there. They'd wake up in the morning. They would make beer, and it was huge. Today, Olympia beer is owned by Pabst Blue Ribbon. So if you get Olympia beer, it is not the same beer that you would have had, but I'll take you to that in a second. This is inside the Schmidt house, and I forget which of the Schmidt sons did this, but he was really into ships. Like, he was obsessed. And so he built the interior of his room to feel like a seagoing ship. So you can actually see at the top there just a little portion of the oil lamp that he had down there. The bed on the left actually is like a Murphy bed, so it folds back in, and then you could pull it out at night. It had like a starboard and a port lamp inside there, all these different cubbies, things that you would have on a ship. I love that room so much. But here you go. So this is a historic rendering of the brewery with the Schmidt House up on the top there, right on the Deschutes. Now, this is a favorite part of the walking tour for me when we do the walking tour downtown Olympia. This is Olympia Artesian Well. The park has gone through a lot of back and forth. They tried to turn it into a full park where people could go. It had sort of a dangerous element come into it. They got rid of it. They fenced it off. They've opened it up. They've had a hard time trying to figure out what to do with it. But the Artesian Well is still there, and it is still operational, and it is a place where a lot of people get their water. I think most people that we talk to about this assume it's just transients that get water from there. And there is a level of the homeless where they can get free, clean water from this Artesian Well. But also people from all walks of life downtown Olympia, like this gentleman right here, will just take jugs down there, fill them up, and go about their life. And it's because it's free, it's clean, and it's delicious. I've drank from this Artesian Well on several occasions in my life, and it's a cool thing to do when you're down there. So I can take you back to the map here really quick so you can get an idea for where this is. But it's right downtown. If we can go down here. So this is the park right here. And you can see the Artesian Well is just at the back here. So there it is, Artesian Well, right on the corner of Jefferson and 4th Ave, right next to one of my favorite places. It's this occult themed like vampire bar, Cryptotropa, and it's not for everyone. I can admit it, but I really enjoy it down there. So if you have the opportunity, you're in downtown Olympia, go to the Artesian Well, get some free clean water, become a part of this experience. The other thing, oh, this is Cryptotropa. I knew I had to put a slide in there because they're so cool. One of my favorite things about them, this is showing my colors right now, is they have this mortuary prepping table here that you can use as a place to sit and have your drinks. Oh, man. Anyhow, so yeah, a lot of homebrewers have followed in the tradition of the Schmidt family. I know that they do use the water. It has no additives in it. It's just pure, clean water, like the original Olympia brewing days. And one of the great users of this water is, in fact, Well 80. Well 80 is a microbrew in downtown Olympia. And this is their setup that you can see here actually in the back of the brewery. So they have this whole system right there where they test the water because it's constantly flowing, but they brew all of their beer in-house with water from, you may have guessed, Well 80. And they actually brew the original Olympia beer. They went through and found the Leopold Schmidt hand-drawn recipe for this, translated it from German into English, and then do a replica of it, which I think, I'm not entirely clear on what the name is because it changed, I think, but Leopold #1, I think is what it used to be called or is called today. And that is the closest thing that you can have to an original Olympia beer. What people would have grown up with in the area, what they would have known as Olympia. If you're going to try it the way with the same water, the same recipe to the same specifications, you want to go to Well 80 and try it there. And they do really, really good beer there. Not just the traditional German Olympia style, but a whole variety out there. And it's good stuff. Yeah. Artesian Brewing. Doesn't get much better than that, my friends. So downtown, there's so many cool buildings. I wanted to highlight just a couple of them really quick. If we go back to the old Capitol building, just down the street here, you can kind of see it right here, right next to Buck's Fifth Avenue Spice Shop, which is a cool building in its own right. On the corner here, with this giant skylight up there, this is the Jeffers Photography Studio. And when you look at the historic photograph of it, it hasn't changed too much. That's the same window. And the reason they had the window like that built was to let in light. They would cover it with a lightly opaque piece of fabric, and it would diffuse the light so he could do a portrait studio on the top floor up there. And Jeffers is the most famous photographer in the Olympia area. If you find any like historic photographs of Olympia, very likely they came from Jeffers. And he was very good friends with the predominant architect of Olympia at the time, who always liked to do the California style. So you'll notice that a lot of the historic structures in Olympia have this like Spanish mission feel, and they were buddies. So he designed the Jeffers Photography Studio, and so many of the original historic structures downtown Olympia had Jeffers photography on them. So it was pretty good. A little give and take with prominent movers and shakers in the area. Also, this is 4th Avenue, and it gives you an idea of just like how important it's always been to the area, and just how many different things have gone on there. Just bakeries, bowling alleys, movie theaters, all the major structures in the area have been right down here on 4th Avenue, including, but not limited to, these fine gentlemen from the Columbia Firehouse, the first really prominent firehouse in the area there. And this is their rig. You gotta love those hats. And I don't know if this is a fire. I don't think it's a fire engine. To be a fire engine, don't you have to pump your own water? Someone knows the answer to this. The Capital National Bank building, also located on 4th, and was one of the more really exquisite buildings that came in down there, and really leveraged that local sandstone they had. And if you guys want to do a deeper dive on the historic structures in downtown Olympia, because again, this is just a beginning tour, you can actually go to whatwasthere.com, and I'll do this. They've got the current map of the area, but it gives you all of these old school photographs, and shows you could be like, here, you're like, oh, what was here? And so it'll give you like this one of East 4th Avenue or the 4th Avenue train wreck. Really good material, and a lot of it, so much so that I can't even get into it all tonight, but I wanted you guys to have that resource. I'll share the link with you guys here. One of the most exquisite buildings down there that we always like to cover on the walking tours is, of course, the Capitol Theater building. It was the first one in the area, and did, of course, live shows, then moved on to projectors, and still operates as a theater in the area. And if you can see in the photograph here, the 4 sort of round windows with the stained glass, those are original to the building. It has gone through quite a bit of renovations. And again, like the 1949 earthquake that devastated so much of Washington State was brutal and merciless to the Olympia area. But this particular theater survived pretty much relatively unscathed. They managed to come through the whole thing all right. And they do still do a lot of stuff there. Here's a picture of the interior down there. This one, however, is one of my favorites. This is the security building, and it is Olympia's first skyscraper. Buckle up. 5 stories, my friends. 5 stories when this bad boy was designed. This is what it looks like today. This is what it used to look like. You'll notice not too much has changed. And it still has some cool pieces to it, like the original burglar alarm is still on the exterior of the building. It's still got all of its cool little designs in there. You can see the griffins on the top. They did a bunch of pineapples as well. What made it so cool and continues to be a sweet footnote for me is that there was a bank in the bottom of it, hence the security portion of it there. And this is part of the building. It had a butcher shop in the area down there, but the bank building ends up becoming Dillinger's today. Dillinger's is like a 1920s speakeasy themed bar and restaurant, and the base of that building occupies the former bank portion of the security building. And they're right next to Gatsby's, a 1920s themed like beauty salon that can do more than just 1920s haircuts, in case you're curious. But this is Dillinger's here, and they have the bank vault at the back, which you can reserve as a VIP area. So if you have like a private party and you want to do your like old fashions together, you can actually drink them all in the private bank vault section back there, which is just too cool. Another downtown business that I'm a huge fan of is Batdorf and Bronson. So they have a downtown location, but then actually right on the waterfront, if I can zoom you guys out here. Oh boy, I've lost myself already here. Here we go. They're out here by the Olympia Farmers Market, and they have all of their roasting done in-house right here, and they do cuppings as well. And if you've never done a cupping, they sound kind of bougie, I'll admit it. But it is such a cool way to get to know coffee. Like, you might think that you're into a light roast or a dark roast or a medium or like an Ethiopian or a Colombian or a Sumatran. But until you go and do it, it's essentially like a wine tasting for coffee, where you get to smell the beans. Then they pour hot water on it, and you smell if anything has changed. You remove the crust, you take the aroma again, and then you just do little sips of it, and it really changes your experience with coffee. And Batdorf and Bronson does, in my opinion, the best cupping in the area. But they also have a downtown location, which is in the former Harris Dry Goods shop, which is a very historic structure down there and is more or less the same exterior. It was changed in the 1950s pretty dramatically. And then during the sort of like revitalization of the downtown in the 1990s, they changed it back to be as historically accurate as possible. So Batdorf and Bronson downtown is in this Harris Dry Goods place. And yeah, Batdorf and Bronson, if that's what you're looking for here. And I'll share that with you guys later too. But they do some great stuff down there, and they're one of my favorites. There's good coffee in Olympia. Obviously, Olympia Roasters is a huge one down there, and then Ember Goods does this phenomenal mocha right downtown. They're sort of near Sylvester Park, and they have like a cool little hipster shop in there as well. So they're all doing good stuff down there. Another one of my favorite buildings downtown is the Olympia Press Building, and it is this building right here. It's just located right downtown, sort of near the farmers market, but it was, as the name implies, the home of the first printing press down there, where they were doing all of the newspapers and everything. And it's a cool building, worth walking past, and has some of the best murals in the area just across the street. Very close to the Olympia Film Society, which I love. I think this is one of the greatest murals in there. It's on the side of an old theater, and it's got the gooey duck for the P. If you're not familiar with what a gooey duck is, it's essentially a very large mollusk native to the Pacific Northwest area. They're incredibly difficult to catch. You have to go for a very specialized season, and they look very inappropriate. If you ever Google gooey duck, just know that you've been warned preemptively. It's going to be a fun time. And then this is Buck's Fifth Avenue. So this is the one that's right next to the Jeffers studio. And this for me is quintessential Olympia, where you have the historic structure and it's got the sort of like funky vibe to it. It's got a spice shop in the bottom. They've done a lot of cool murals on the side of it. And Olympia has always been a mover and a shaker. This is where the women's suffrage movement really hit fever pitch and took off. And so this is women from the late 1800s campaigning for the right to vote during the suffrage movement. And a lot of these floats and movements were happening in downtown Olympia, and eventually it happened, but so much of that took place right downtown in Olympia there. And this particular statue of George Washington is right in front of the old Capitol building that we talked about there at the very beginning. So Olympia, it's had its up and downs. It is still currently the capital for the state of Washington, in case you weren't already aware. And it is so deeply connected to so many other places there. The first territorial penitentiary was situated in Bucota, which is a small town not too far from Olympia. It's very close to Tumwater. It is very close to the old Olympia Brewing building, and it is still producing a significant amount of really good beer. One of my favorites down there, aside from Well 80, is Three Magnets. I think Three Magnets is just doing unparalleled beer stuff for their class down there, and Fishtail as well. I could go on, and in fact will, for our upcoming Olympia beer tour. So if you guys have questions on that, please let me know. If not, and you've enjoyed your tour tonight and you want to tip your guide, please feel free. It's my privilege to be able to offer these virtual tours to everyone for free, but it is through the generous support of financial sponsors like all of you that we're allowed to continue doing that as we move forward. And you can do that right on prettygrittytours.com. We have a PayPal button right down there on the bottom of our homepage, and every little bit helps. But that said, we are hoping now finally, we weren't sure what phase everything was going to be in, but it looks like we are going to be able to do our Booze and Booze and our new ghost tours with South Tacoma Way, Old Town, and then our original one in downtown Tacoma, with limited groups. And then my wife can attest, I think I finally cracked the formula on how to do our interactive murder mystery tour. So that should be coming very soon. I know I've promised it a lot, but we're finally there. It's got some cool elements to it, and I'm hoping to push that out soon. So we do have some new stuff coming up as far as actual tours. And I'm hoping to have a good tour, a walking tour, in-person one of the Bridges District of Tacoma coming soon. So stuff to look forward to. But until then, thank you guys for joining us tonight. I'm looking forward to seeing at least most of you for our tour of the Meeker Mansion tomorrow. The Eliza Meeker Mansion, actually, out in Puyallup. We get to see the interior of that building and talk a little bit about the history of the Meekers in the area. So thank you guys so much. I'm Chris Staudinger with Pretty Gritty Tours, reminding you to get out there, keep on exploring. See you guys soon.